Hi, Saints, Southern Light Community Church. It's good to be able to share with you again. I hope you are managing well in the midst of this, it seems like never-ending pandemic. Uh, it's very wearying, I think, all of this. It just seems to go on and on. Just to tell you a little story, this morning I woke up, it was raining. I walked into the landing and I could see that there was a leak coming from our flat roof landing. That was a real blessing. And then I went downstairs and had to go into the garage to get something. And then I noticed there was a leak in my garage. So I was off to a great start this morning. And then we've had snow. It's just quite, winter is here. And I have to say, it's not my favorite season of the year. But these aren't the biggest problems that we're facing, are they? It's how we deal with them. And the pandemic is obviously an issue, and it's the longer we're in it, I think the more difficult it can become for us. Things start to get into our thinking. We start to worry. We get anxious. We're restricted. It's a different ball game altogether. And then on top of that, we've got all what's going on with the American political turmoil, which is not very good. And when you look at the news, there doesn't seem to be anything that's very positive at all. And of course, I remember years ago a folk singer, Tom Paxton, sang a song that said the news is all bad, but it's good for a laugh. Well, it's actually not very good for a laugh right now. The reason I'm sharing these things with you is it's what do we do when there seems to be so much that's negative all around us, and there doesn't seem to be any immediate end in sight. Yes, for the pandemic, we're looking for the vaccine to help sort things out, but in the meantime, we're still facing lots of problems, lots of restrictions. I'd like to read to you from the book of Genesis, chapter 35, just to set the scene here. This is the story of Jacob, where God blesses him and renames him. God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you, and purify yourselves and change your garments. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, so that I may make there an altar to the God who answers me in the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I have gone." So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods that they had and the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree that was near Shechem. And as they journeyed, a terror from God fell upon the cities that were around them, so that they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. And Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him, and there he built an altar and called the place El Bethel, because there God had revealed himself to him when he had fled from his brother. Now, the backdrop to this story in chapter 34 is one about Jacob's daughter Dinah, who was abused by a man called Hamor, and he captured Dinah, raped her, and then fell in love with her, wanted to marry her, came back to Jacob and asked about that. And Jacob's sons were incensed, rightly so, at what had happened to their sister. And instead, they were very cunning, and they said, "Well, you'll all have to be circumcised because no uncircumcised person can have anything to do with our family." And so the whole tribe of Hamor, they all got circumcised. And while they were still in that very vulnerable condition, Jacob's sons went and slaughtered them all. And that wasn't Jacob's wish, and he was very worried and upset about this, because he said at the end of 34, "These Canaanites and Perizzites could attack me, and my numbers are few, and I shall be destroyed." And he was really worried about it. And that's when God said to him, "Go up to Bethel." So Jacob is facing a very worrying situation, not the same as we are facing, but worry, anxiety, fear are all the same no matter what the problem is. And that was Jacob's concern. And in the midst of this, God spoke to him and said, go back to Bethel. That's really important for us to grab hold of this, because in the midst of all that we're facing personally, our own home circumstances or our financial circumstances or the state of the nation or the state of the world, it can all just weigh down upon us very heavily. And what God, I believe, wants to say to us, we need to get back to Bethel. What does that mean? Well, Bethel is the place where God reveals himself. In verse 7, Jacob said, he built an altar there at the place and called it Bethel, because that's where God had revealed himself to him when he fled from his brother. And so we need to get back to the place where God reveals himself to us. Remember that story that Jacob was referring to in Genesis 28, where he was running away and he laid down, put his head on a stone, fell asleep, and he had a dream. And in the dream, he saw a ladder from earth to heaven, and angels were ascending and descending. And in the midst of it all, God spoke to him and spoke prophetically, spoke creatively, spoke positively to him to encourage him. And Jacob, after he had awoken from this divine encounter, he said, surely God was in this place and I didn't realize it. And so for us, while God is not afar off, God, as we know, now lives in us by his Spirit, but it's important for us to get back into that place of his presence, to that place of encounter. And we need to cultivate that, because with all of the distractions of our health, our finances, ordering our food, and all the rest of it, plus the world's politics and so on, all of these can be a huge distraction from just taking time out to get back into the presence of God. And I know it sounds easy to just have a time of work, but sometimes we're so preoccupied. We're so distracted by all of this. I'm sure you've heard the little phrases of why pray when you can worry. And it's not so funny, really, because worry is a misuse of imagination. Worry robs us of our peace and our joy, and we need to break it. And the way we break it is by cultivating getting into the presence of God. And we need to make it a priority. I endeavor, when I'm trying to get into a place of worship, is I sing some songs, but it's not enough to sing the songs. I need to sing until my heart comes to peace in his presence. That's when we know we have engaged with him. The Bible says to us, draw near to God and he will draw near to us. And there is a place in a time of personal worship, just singing and praying and talking to God, where we change from not being aware but becoming conscious of his presence. There's a sense of peace, a sense of rest, and a sense of joy. And that's what happens when we cultivate his presence. And as we make it a priority, and Jesus said to the woman of Samaria, it's what the Father is seeking. And when we make it a priority, it's where our heart will engage in a real way in his presence. So that's what Bethel is. It's a place where God reveals himself. So what we need to do, church, is we need to build our own altars for worship. That's what Jacob did. He built an altar. It was quite an Old Testament thing. Wherever they had an encounter with God, wherever they had a revelation or something very important with God happened, they built altars. And I'm sure I've said this to you before, that this thing of worship is our most important function as believers, because out of it everything else flows. And as we build our altars, it's a place where we remember our encounters with God. It's a place where we remember where God intervened in our circumstances and our situations in our lives. And I'm sure all of us have got more than one time, one altar in our lives where God moved on our behalf. And we can look into our history, and we can remember where God, as Jacob said in verse 3, God answered us in our distress. And an altar is a place where we lay our fears and our worries and our anxieties. If I can put it this way, Jacob said, God said to him, you've got to put away your false gods. Fear, anxiety, and worry are false gods appearing real. That's what I believe we understand, that fear is. It's false appearing real. And worry and anxiety can appear very real, but they are designed to distract us and move us away from that sense of peace and rest in God. I remember years ago, I'd been out of work and I was desperate to find work and God divinely orchestrated a set of circumstances, so I got this wonderful job working in a Christian ministry, and it was everything I aspired to do, and I loved it and I enjoyed it immensely. It was very fulfilling. But after 3 years, the organization got into financial difficulties and they had to lay people off, and I was made redundant, and I was very confused as well as very worried about it. And I got on my knees and I cried out to God, and I said, God, you set up the circumstances for me to get this job. It was a divine opportunity, and now what's happened? It's gone. What am I supposed to do? And then as I was contemplating that and complaining to God, I began to think about the story of Elijah when there was a famine in the land, and God sent him to the brook Cherith. And he says, there you can drink the water and the ravens will feed you. And God looked after him. But after a time, it says that the brook dried up. And I suddenly thought about that. And I said, Lord, why did you allow the brook to dry up when you sent him there to look after him? And this was God's answer to me very clearly. He said, Barry, the brook is not your source. I am your source. And so in times of difficulty, I go back to that altar where God spoke to me and said, I am your source, not the job you have. And you see, very quickly, God opened up another door and took me into another new phase of ministry, and it was really excellent. But you see, he was telling me, don't worry, the brook is not your source, the job is not your source, the situation is not your source. I am your source. I will look after you. So we need to build our altars. Go back in your thinking and remember where God intervened. And as you meditate on those, you will have a stirring of faith and expectation that the God who did it then can do it once again. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. What he did yesterday, he can do again today. He's not limited with one or two little miracles in your life. He's the God who is constantly desiring and looking to help us. But we need to get back to Bethel. We need to get back to that place of his presence. And as we cultivate it, as we make that choice, I think the last message I gave you was about Mary and Martha. Remember that Martha was worried about many things, but Mary chose the best thing. She just sat at the feet of Jesus. She got to that place of cultivating being in his presence. And it's in his presence there's fullness of joy. In his presence there's rest. So we need to cultivate that. Get back into his presence at Bethel and build an altar. The brook is not your source. He is your source, as I discovered. And then finally, we need to realize that out of this whole place where he was anxious and worried that this other tribe would come and attack him and he'd be destroyed, and he became worried when God instructed him to go to Bethel and build an altar. What happened after that? When he fulfilled those requirements, blessing came. So from Bethel to building an altar, blessing comes. In verse 5, it says that they journeyed and terror fell upon the cities, so they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. You see, what he was worried about came to nothing because God intervened and protected him from the enemies that he thought might threaten his well-being and his family. And then not only that, in the midst of difficulty, he found that prosperity came to him because God spoke to him in verse 12 and said, The land that I gave to Abraham, I give to you. And of course, land is financial collateral and was financial collateral back in those days. So God looked after him. So if you're worried about anything, maybe your finances are not so good, just build an altar at Bethel and give it all to him. Lay your fears, your worries, your anxieties, your false gods on that altar and walk away from them and trust that the God who intervened with Jacob will intervene with you, and he will bless you, and he will protect you, and he will prosper you. He'll make you fruitful as you put your trust in him like Jacob did. In this difficult times that we're in, make a choice. Choose to worship. Choose to find a moment that works for you in the day and just get alone and just lay it all on the altar and worship him. Thank him. Turn your desperation into a declaration. Give thanksgiving for all the historical things you remember where God showed up and blessed you, because he'll bless you again because he delights to do that. And turn your problems into praise. Praise him for who he is. He's the God of miracles. He's the God who will do what you need for your good and his glory. Our God will supply all our needs according to his riches and glory. And turn your worries into worship. And as you do so, you'll find a peace and a rest come into your heart. I remember reading Spurgeon, what a great preacher, and dealing with the enemy, he said he was smote with his own sword. In other words, turn the enemy's worries, anxieties, fears, and doubts, turn them around and turn that sword upon him and declare the goodness of God. Declare the steadfastness of God. Declare that this is the God of Bethel, the one who will intervene, the one who will protect and provide for us all in these times that we're facing. Don't worry. It's a misuse of imagination. It's a waste of emotion. It doesn't change anything. We can't change anything, Jesus said, by worrying. So just lay it on the altar. Get back to Bethel, to the place where God reveals himself in prayer, in praise, in worship. On the altar there, lay those false gods down and pick up his peace and his presence and his power. And as you do so, the blessing of God will make rich, and he adds no sorrow to it. Just hold on to him, because he delights to bless you. Lord Jesus, I just pray for each one watching this, that your presence and your peace will settle on them, that anxiety will dissolve and drain away, and that in place of that, your presence will bring rest and peace and joy, with a sense of hope and faith stirring in each heart that my God will provide all that I need in these days. Well, the Lord bless you. I pray that you will have a great week in his presence.